Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue. This is episode number 28, and tonight we are talking about the countdown to Copa from now until everyone leaves for the big summer tournaments, mostly Copa America, but also the Euros. But as always, I'm Scotty. I'm here with my co-host Saur. How you feeling today, man?
I'm feeling good, man. How are you feeling? I feel like you always ask me how I'm feeling, but I've never reciprocated that. So I'm going to ask you today. How are you feeling?
I'm good, man. I wish that there was more soccer because I feel like we have a lot of players that I want to see play soccer, and I don't know how many opportunities we're going to get over the next couple weeks and months. Probably top of that list is Matthias Rojas, but I would love to see Kramaski get some starts, and I don't know if we're going to get that anytime soon. So it just feels like there's a lot of players that are senior team players that are first team players that deserve first team minutes, and that they aren't getting minutes because there's a ton of depth and a ton of quality, but also it doesn't feel like there's a big runway for them to get a ton of minutes over the next couple of weeks. So that's how I'm feeling. I wish there was more games.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it also feels like we're coming to this sort of a milestone in the middle of the season where now we have a run of 7 games. And then after that, it's going to be a good few games before we see some of our main players get back into the starting lineup. And of course, we've got the international games coming up across Europe as well. The leagues are going to be ending. Champions League is almost in the final stages. So it just feels like less football over the next few months, and never a good sign when there's less football.
Well, that's the beauty of the MLS season being in the summer or being, calendar year, is that you get football all year round when you watch a European league, and when you watch the MLS, there's no break, and that is the positive. So, I don't see soccer slowing down anytime soon, and this Inter Miami team also doesn't feel like it's slowing down anytime soon. 3 wins in a row, 2 of them on the road. How are you feeling about the team right now? I know we had about a month of really bad vibes, 5 games without a win, but 3 games in a row now that we've won, we're top of the table. It feels like we are sort of back to who we're supposed to be. We got some guys back from injury. We don't have the Monterreys of the world hanging over our head, and it feels like we're feeling good about where we are. But I don't know, how are you feeling about the team?
It's been fairly positive over the last few games. I think we're doing really well. Obviously, there are a few gaps in this team that need to be filled up. I'm still waiting on our midfield to get back to full strength. But I think this team's performing really well overall. There's a lot of positives coming through. We're beating teams that we should be beating. We're seeing Messi do what Messi does best. And a lot of our players seem to be getting some chemistry together, which is always fun to watch. And yeah, I can't really complain, right? I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop and something bad to happen before the dream really ends. But I'm hoping that doesn't happen before the end of the season.
Well, hopefully it doesn't happen in these next 7 games, which is the main topic of tonight's show. Like I mentioned, it's 7 games until we're going to see some players depart for the big summer international tournaments. And we're going to talk all about these next 7 games, who we're playing, what we expect from the team, all sorts of things, guys that we think are going to have a big role in the next 7 games, guys that we think might not have a big role, because it doesn't feel like there's a ton of midweek games. I don't know how much rotation there's going to be. But before we do all of that, I want to talk about a few interviews that happened over the last couple days. The first was with Benjamin Kramaski. He was asked about his his international decision. He is a dual national American-Argentine, and he has, the option to play for either. I think a lot of people, when he was breaking out, or at least last summer when people started noticing him, thought that because Lionel Messi was on the team and there was a big Argentine influence that maybe Argentina was the way he was going to go. And then I think it's the September window or maybe the October window of last fall, he gets called up to the U.S. national team. He gets his first cap, but it's in a friendly, so it's not a cap tying game. And seems to be more in the picture with the U.S. men's national team and that program, the Olympic team, and maybe the under 20 team. I'm not sure. He is eligible for the next under 20 World Cup. Anyways, in this interview, he had a few interesting quotes. He said he spoke with the Argentine U20 coach named Javier Mascherano, who I'm not particularly familiar with the Argentine program, but basically he just said that his conversation with him was very honest and open, and he made it seem like, at least, inferring from the quotes that Benha gave, that it didn't seem like the Argentine program had a very high opinion on Kramaski and his future. And that's part of the reason why he's going to be with the U.S. men's national team for the next, for the Olympics and possibly the under-20 tournament. Shots fired, right?
I don't know. I actually had a different read in that interview. I thought he was quite mature in his understanding of why Mascherano said that he may not fit in this Argentine setup and why the US men's national team might be a better option for him. And sometimes you just have to be clear with youth and developing players about what their position is on the team setup and where they stand. And they need to play games, right? Kramaski needs to play as many games as he can. It's hard to break into the Argentine setup, whether it's the under 20s or whether it's the senior team. And I know we rate Kramaski very, very highly, but I can understand why Mascherano said that. Obviously, I think he's definitely of a caliber to play with the Argentine team as well. But there must be something that they must have noticed in terms of his development and what's best for him. And I'm actually glad that they were able to convey that to him and be direct with him, and he's able to make the decision himself rather than, keeping him lingering on and just not giving him a direction to grow, because it's going to be an important decision for him, especially when it comes to the summer where he wants to, play with, whether he gets picked up for the Olympic team or not. Overall, I think I had a more positive view of this, and I don't see it as shots fired, really. I think it's part and parcel of the game.
Yeah, I disagree. I'm not super intimately familiar with the Argentine setup, especially in the youth ranks. Obviously, the senior team is a much more difficult proposition to get invited to than the U.S. men's national team. Of course, no one is suggesting otherwise. But this is a 19-year-old that's not going to be cap tied for like 3 or 4, the next 3 years, probably. If you're Argentina, I think it makes all the sense in the world to try and keep him at least eligible for your program to see where he ends up. I think Kramaski is a guy that's going to be in Europe in the next 19 or 20 months. And then once he's there, he has the physical tools to develop and become, anything he wants to be, really. And so I think the idea that you're putting away a player like this so early, it feels very counterproductive. And to me, it feels like there's and maybe this is just my Americanism going, but it feels like there's a shot that, guys in America aren't developed as well, and guys in playing in the MLS aren't getting the same development as guys in Argentina. And I don't necessarily think there's a huge difference between the Argentine league and the MLS. And I think the American development system has gotten a lot better over the last couple of years. And again, this isn't even really about the senior team. I'm talking more about the under 20s and the Olympic teams, because I think Kramaski will be eligible for the next Olympics, and he's eligible for the next under 20 World Cup. So there's a lot of opportunities for him to be a part of that program. And sounds like they weren't that interested in him. And I don't know. I'm a USMNT fan, so I'm happy. I think it's going to be really fun to watch him at the Under 20 World Cup and the Olympics and whatever he ends up being a part of.
It's a fantastic pickup for the USMNT. So even the youth team, I think it's going to be a really, really big boost for them. But I will say this, though. The Argentine setup has a lot of players coming through the ranks. And a lot of these young players, specifically nowadays, South America is a big market for all the, big European teams, the top 5 leagues. And a lot of these players get a much earlier opportunity to play in Europe and try and, even if they don't get to play regularly in the first team, they still have some sort of a developmental route there. And there could potentially be some sort of bias as well against the MLS, in the sense that Kramaski is 19. He's not playing. He's not been picked up by any of the big teams. He's considered not on the best developmental route by the Argentine setup, and that could be a consideration for sure. I completely agree with you that the difference between the MLS and the Argentine league in terms of their development setup is not that different. But you don't know what the background considerations are. Overall, I think this is a better move for Kramaski because he's just going to get to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond compared to what they might do with him in the Argentine setup. So a positive development for the US football youth setup.
Yeah, I disagree with a lot of what you just said, but I don't want to make this about the USMNT and defending American soccer because that's not what this show's about. So, yeah, I hope Ben-Ami Kramaski becomes a star for the USMNT, and I hope he proves that Argentina made a mistake to not bring him in. Yeah, like I'm seeing some comments about guys that are playing in Europe, and I want to make this a good point. Federico Redondo is a prospect that Argentina is very interested in, and he's 21. And we're going to see these two guys on the field at the same time over the rest of the season, and it will be interesting to see how they compare to each other when they're on the same field in the same surroundings against the same competition. And by the way, Kramaski's 2 years younger, and so we'll get a real good chance to see what they're really like, when they're going up against each other, because they're going to be fighting for spots, and it'll be interesting to see how they perform. Anyways, moving on, let's go to this Robert Taylor interview. Yesterday, he was the designated player to speak to the media, and the only interesting note is that he did talk about how he wants to stay with Inter Miami as long as he possibly can. He talked about how this was the best club he's ever been a part of. He's on the last year of his contract, and the reason probably is because he's on one of the best contracts in the MLS. I think he's making under $300K. An incredible player for the cap charge you're getting. He was making less money than Stefanelli, Coco Jean, guys that weren't really impacting games at all. And Robert Taylor is one of the best players in the final third in the MLS, really. And so I hope we get to keep him. But any thoughts on that Robert Taylor interview?
We're going to see the rankings again later today. He's a top 3 player for us, man. And it warms my heart to see him love Inter Miami as much as we love him. I'll be honest, I don't see him being on the squad for much longer. I don't know. It's just a personal feeling. This hasn't got to do with anything in terms of, my understanding of what the background maneuvering is and the roster setup is. But I don't know, man. It feels like he's going to be one of those players that will be sacrificed to get in a big name through the window. I'm not sure if you have a similar feeling about this, but I would like to keep him for as long as possible. But I just feel like he might be gone next year, dude.
Yeah, well, he is on the last year of his contract. The reason he would leave is because he's going to be able to make 3 times as much money somewhere else, even in the MLS, maybe more. So, Miami just might not be able to keep him because of cap reasons. But I think the best chance we have is if he's willing to take a little bit of a pay cut to stay in Fort Lauderdale. And hearing things like this, seeing him skip national team duty to stay with the club, things like that make you feel like this is a player really committed to this program and really wants to see this out. And so if this is the last year with Robert Taylor, I hope we get a lot of trophies and he goes out a huge winner, because he's become one of the favorites in Inter Miami history, really.
And you can see the difference when he's playing and when he's not playing. As soon as he's back from injury, you see us being absolutely demonic on the front line. And, he's just got a different dimension to his game that he brings to this team. I just hope he continues to stay fit and contributes as much as he can over the next few months and win us a few games and trophies.
Let's sort of switch into our main topic of the day. I'm going to pull up the Supporter Shield table real quick. I know that there was a Philadelphia Union game over the last couple of days, so that's why I was just checking to see what the table looks like. It looks like the Seattle Sounders won yesterday. So this is the table. I wanted to give this sort of for everyone to see before we make our big conversation about what Inter Miami needs to do over the next 7 games, which is the lead up into Copa America. Inter Miami's top of the table, 21 points. Over our East opponents, we have 3 points on Cincinnati, 4 points on New York, 5 points on Toronto. Really, a lot of the big teams on this list seem to be coming from the West. So Inter Miami in a really good spot in the East. They do have an extra game played, but feels like they're really in good spirits right now, and they're poised to go on a nice little run. Anything before we switch over to the schedule? Anything about this that really stands out to you? The top 11 from the Supporter Shield standings.
Yeah, and I think we spoke about this in the last podcast as well, but before the last run of 4 or 5 games, this table seemed a lot more bleak. Even though Inter Miami was in the top 3, it didn't seem like we were as well positioned. It didn't seem like we were as far ahead from the pack as we thought we would be. And it just seemed a little bit of a bleak prospect at that time. And that just goes to show what a good run of 3 or 4 games can actually do for your standings and table. And we're essentially top with even the other teams playing as many games as us. They would only just be able to tie our point tally, which is, I think, a phenomenal testament to what we've done over the last few games. And winning a good chunk of consecutive games back to back really helped our cause and helped lift our spirits, as you said. I think the next 7 games are going to be just as important. I know it's kind of wishful to ask to win all 7 games of them law, but hey, why not? We've got Messi, right? Why not?
Yeah, and I think that's important context, what you just said, because we shouldn't expect all these other teams to just win game after game after game after game. I know that there's a lot of people that are new to Inter Miami since last summer, but you don't see teams in this league go on runs like Manchester City does, or Arsenal, or Real Madrid, or I guess this year Bayer Leverkusen, where they just win every single game and you have to be perfect to keep up. You're going to drop points in this league. And so when you do go on a run of 3 straight wins, you do look a lot better in the table. And if Inter Miami can make this a more significant run than just 3 in a row, they could really pull away early. And I think that's probably the goal from these next 7 games. Just looking at this, you don't see the Columbus Crew. They've had a number of draws in a row, which is, 6-8 points dropped over the last 3 or 4 games. New York Red Bulls were above us at one point. I think they've gotten 1 from their last 6. So it's really easy to drop points in this league, and especially on the road. And so for Inter Miami to go on a nice run where they get win after win after win, they could really put themselves in a really good position. Let's move over to the schedule, and we're sitting on 21 points. We have 7 games left until not the start of the Copa America, but the point where the guys are going to leave to join their national teams for the build up to both the Copa America and the Euros. These are the 7 games, man. We play the Red Bulls this weekend. We play Montreal next weekend. We play Orlando City that midweek, DC United, Vancouver, Atlanta, St. Louis. None of these teams, other than this weekend's New York Red Bulls game, really feels that intimidating. I guess we do have a trip to Vancouver, who is, doing pretty well, but these feel like 7 winnable games, other than maybe that Vancouver game. If Inter Miami can go on a nice run and get 18 points, 16 points plus, you can really build a lead that could be substantial and kind of run away from the rest of the table.
See, at this point, it's still early in the season, right? We're still trying to develop a foundation. We're still getting off footing. We haven't had our best 11 on the pitch for a while. Have a few players coming back from injury. So these 7 games are going to be important to try and set ourselves a platform for how the rest of the season plays out. When we lose a lot of the players, in which we're going to talk about, we're inevitably going to lose a few games there. And I would expect us to lose or draw more games than we'd actually win on the other side of this 7-game run. So for me, I think this is really, really important. If you look at it, of the 7 or 8 games that we have on here, 4 we've already played before, lost quite badly against New York, absolutely destroyed Orlando. Montreal, unexpected loss against them. DC, we were able to come back and win. So it's not like we are in unfamiliar territory. Of course, the other 4 or 3 games that we have would be somewhat of a new test. But I see this team winning all of these games, man, or at least 6 or 5 of these games and then drawing a couple. I don't see a loss there, or I don't expect a loss there. That being said, Inter Miami does have a tendency to make things difficult for itself. So we don't know how they're going to show up, but I think it's a really, really good set of games and a good platform for us to build up from.
Yeah, there's only one midweek game, so you're not going to need to rotate a ton. You're going to have your best 11 available virtually for every game. Maybe they rotate in that DC United game at home. But other than that, you really have a runway to play Lionel Messi every game, play Luis Suarez every game, Busquets, um, the guys you want to play and that have gotten you the last three results. And as long as everyone can stay healthy, it feels like they're going to be the favorites in, at minimum, 6 of these games. Again, I point to that Vancouver game because we haven't played them, and they've been good this year, so I don't want to discount them. But this Red Bull game at home, it feels like a chance for Inter Miami to get a little bit of redemption for what happened last time, and it's going to be at home. Montreal, we definitely need redemption. They aren't as good as they were when we played them last time. They're still well coached, but it feels like it feels like Inter Miami needs to go get that win on the road. Orlando
Even
City,
last time, like we were
I agree.
winning. Like, we should have won against them. That was definitely a game where we dropped points, and they weren't the better team in that game. New York was better than us. Montreal was not.
Yeah, and that New York game was interesting because it was during the international break, and so we were missing like 5 or 6 players. They were also missing a bunch of good players, but it was in the pouring rain on the road, and it felt like after about
Bad conditions
20
overall.
minutes, Inter Miami didn't really want to be there anymore, and they played like it. So tough. We had some rotation in that game too. But yeah, Montreal, they're well coached, but they're not that good. We should be able to go out and get a win. Orlando City on the road, we've traditionally not done that well on the road at Orlando City at Exploria or Inter & Co Stadium now, but we've never gone with Lionel Messi. So you just have to feel great about that. DC United, we saw they're not that good. Atlanta at home feels like Inter Miami will be the heavy favorites in that. And then same with St. Louis. So it feels like there's 18 plus points on the table over the next 7 games. And if Inter Miami does that, they'll be sitting on 39 halfway through the season. And they'll be feeling really good about not just making the playoffs, but being the Supporters Shield winners. Just FYI, that would take us to 18 games played on the season, which would be more than halfway. So we are getting into the meat of the season. We're now 11 games played in the MLS, which is about a third. So we should be firing now, right? This isn't like there's no more early season jitters. There's no more building into it. We've seen guys like Sergio Busquets maybe slowly build into it, but he's there now, and everyone else should be. Obviously, there's some injuries that you got, guys coming back from injury, you want to slow them in. But other than that, this team should be firing, and all 7 of these games are not just winnable, but Inter Miami is probably going to be the favorite going into them.
Yeah, I'll say this. We're getting into that part of the season where you now need to start building your consistency. And this is going to be the part of the season where you're going to actually see how much the depth is and what the team actually looks like. And I'm not sure if you agree with me on this, but it just feels like Inter Miami's been playing on the third gear for a while. And that's not a bad thing in any way. Like, it just feels like there's so much more that this team has to unlock just by virtue of the players that are going to come back, by virtue of some of the combinations that we still haven't seen, akin to Kremaski and Redondo in the midfield, Gomez coming back from injury. I just feel like there's so much more potential for this Inter Miami team to not just compete at the level that they are right now, but absolutely build up from there and break that level. And I just think it's scary times for when our players actually fully fit, come back, and we are able to play our starting 11, our preferred 11, without having to worry about any of the injuries. Because it just seems like this team is coming back into a sort of rhythm and a good form, and without having some of our main players. So imagine what it's going to look like when most of our players are back. That being said, I don't know whether we'll have all of our players available at the same time, and I don't want to jinx us, but it does sound like a really good future for us in the next few months.
Yeah, if we're lucky, we will get a point where this team stays healthy and we still get Diego Gomez, Jordi Alba, and Federico Redondo back. And at that point, at least as far as the MLS competition we're going to be facing, and really even getting into the Leagues Cup, this is going to be a scary roster. That 5-game period where we didn't win a single game, we got a couple draws, a couple losses. That was mostly without Lionel Messi. That was with a bunch of injuries. Campana was out. Robert Taylor was out. Kermaski didn't play for most of that. And so Redondo was out. And Diego Gomez got hurt in part of it. So this team could get really scary over the night. And I keep pinpointing these 7 games because we're going to get these guys back from injury at some point in this run. And then with a fully healthy roster, you're talking about not just a starting 11 that's the best in the league, but a bench that can start on almost any other team in the league. And so you really might get this type of Manchester City run, Arsenal run, where you just win game after game after game, 3 points after 3 points after 3 points. It's out there for this team. And yet this is still the MLS, and it's still hard to win on the road, and all of those things still apply. But my question is, what should the expectation be from fans over this 7-game period?
All right, so I think we're way past the stage where we're going to talk about some of the early season jitters. I think this team has started to build itself into a form, and we're showing that we're capable of dispatching teams ruthlessly. We went out in the last game, we went behind in the first minute, and then we were able to come back with an absolute fury and vengeance. And it seems like that's what this team is about, not letting any of the opposition dominate us in any way. I don't think we're going to see that every game, but that should be the expectation from fans because that's the level that we've shown we can play at. That being said, I think the minimum from this 21 possible points is, I think, 16, 15 is the bare minimum. That would mean that we're winning 5 of the 7 games, right? So I think that should be our expectation, and then a couple of draws here and there, because these are all winnable games, especially with some of the players coming back from injury.
Let's go back in time for the MLS season so far, and it feels like this Inter Miami team has been the better / more dominant team in almost all of our games. We'll put the New York Red Bull game aside, but just starting from the top in Real Salt Lake, which is a really good team, by the way. They're right up there in the Supporters Shield standings. I think they might be second. Yeah, they're second. We beat them up at home. I mean, they had a nice little run in the second half, but it was still a 2-0 win. We scored early, and we kind of put the game away. That LA Galaxy game on the road was a lot tougher, and I want to give the Galaxy credit. They're also a really good team, though. Again, third in the Supporters Shield standings, so a really good team. But then we crushed Orlando City. We played that Montreal game, which we lost, but we were the better team, I thought, for most of it.
By far, yeah.
I thought we lost about 5 minutes of extra time because of the refereeing, but I'll get into it. We beat DC United pretty handily. That NYCFC game, again, we got a draw, but Luis Suarez could have had 4 goals in that game as well. And so, and then this Colorado Rapids game we played a couple weeks ago, the second half we absolutely dominated, and that was when Lionel Messi came on. So if you put Lionel Messi on this team and you give him a healthy roster around him, it feels like we should run through virtually every team in this league. So I agree with you, man. 15, 16 points feels like the minimum expectation, and anything less than that feels like it's a failure. With that said, we still have 3 road games in this trip. Are there any specific games on this list that scare you, or that you want to pinpoint as like, that's the one I think that we might have trouble with?
I think the New York Red Bulls game is going to be important, not because it scares me, but just in terms of the reaction that the team's going to have. I think the team needs a big reaction against them. We need a big win against New York because, let's be honest, keeping aside the weather and the conditions that were against us, injuries as well, we were quite comprehensively beaten that day. So the fact that the reverse leg has come back so quickly, and when Lionel Messi is back, when we've got some of our players firing, good for us. And I think we need to win that game comprehensively. I don't want any 2-1, 3-2 scoreline. I want like a nice, chunky 4-1. So that's one game that I'm looking out for. And I agree with you. Vancouver is going to be a big one on the road. And I think for me, it's going to be most of the road games that are going to be slightly concerning because we've seen that we start fairly slow on the road. And it's always somehow we manage to find ourselves behind in one way or another, whether it's Drake Callender doing jumping jacks on the edge of his box, or whether it's one of our defenders who's decided to give the ball away in the first 2 minutes. So the road games, I think, for me, are the most important ones, being Vancouver and Orlando City as well, because they're going to want to have revenge on us after that 5-1 thrashing, 5-0 thrashing.
Yeah, but Orlando City's not in great form right now. They, the fans are really frustrated and the team's not performing. It just doesn't scare me right now. And I'm sure I will live to rue those words. But to me, the big one, the one I'm really interested in is the Vancouver game. And before I talk about that, I agree with you. The Red Bull game, I think it's more important not for the game specifically and the opponent, but the momentum that we'll build. We've just won 3 games in a row, but we've won against some teams that are not so good and teams that are in sort of a bad part of their season. Nashville hasn't really clicked in yet. The New England Revolution are just really bad. And so 3 wins in a row, 2 on the road, but it would be really nice to get a win against a team like the Red Bulls, who I think have established themselves as one of the better teams in MLS this season, or at least we should expect them to be one of the better teams in MLS this season. And so if we can go get a win against them, we'd feel good about, overturning what happened last time. And we'll feel like, okay, this team is real and we're firing and we're ready to go and nobody's going to stop us. So I agree that's a big one just for momentum's sake. But this Vancouver game I'm really interested in. It's been a while since Inter Miami's played them. And we're going to Vancouver. It's the farthest trip in the MLS from South Florida to, the west coast of Canada. So that one I'm interested in. I wonder if we're going to get rotation in that game. It looks like we have a game 4 days later against Atlanta. So I wonder if we're going to get rotation on the road. I don't know if Vancouver has turf, but either way.
What do you think with Tata Martino? Do you think we're going to get rotation in this game? I doubt it.
I think we might, because I think he might want to put his best players on for that Atlanta United game 4 days later. He has history with Atlanta United, and then them being in the East, it's a game that he's going to want to win, and the result means more because you're playing an Eastern Conference team versus a Western Conference team, because it's a 6-point swing instead of just 3 points. So, and then they play again, I guess, on June 1st. So they're going to play 2 games right after that. I think we might get some rotation there, but yeah, man, it feels like they should win the majority of these games and they should be in a really good spot. If they do that, 15, 16 points, 17 points, they're going to be in the high 30s at the halfway mark, on pace to get in the high 60s over the course of the season. That feels like a pace that could win the Supporters' Shield this year. And I know some people have mixed opinions on how important that is, but I'm sure the guys want to win that. And then, of course, it gives us home field advantage throughout the playoffs, which is important. You want that too. So not just for the fans, but it's just easier to play games at home, especially when you get later in the season. It gets cold in some of those places, and the guys that have been used to South Florida weather might not enjoy going into the 20s and 30 degrees. So you want that. Do you feel like that would put this team on track to be where they want to be?
Winning 16 points out of the potential 21?
Yeah, something like that.
I would say so. I think that's asking this team to win all 21 points is a big, it's a big ask, because you can't expect any team to just go out and win every game unless you're Man City. So I think that's a very reasonable situation where we do end up winning 16 points. And I think that's going to put us in a really, really good spot overall, because I don't expect the other teams at the same time to have a similar sort of a run. So for me, I think it's going to really put us in a good position before we kick on to the next part of the season.
Let me reframe my question. Yes, it'll put us at the top of the table and we'll feel good about where we're at, but I'm thinking more like psychologically for the rest of the league. If Inter Miami can go out and get 18 points, 17 points, 19 points. They build a 6, 7, 8 point lead on the top of the table. Does it get to a point where Inter Miami just feels like a juggernaut, right? We just mentioned Man City and Arsenal, but it feels like Inter Miami has the talent and depth to do that type of thing in this league, right? And of course, that could just be wishful thinking and us being Inter Miami fans and us not appreciating the other talents in the league quite as much. But I don't know, man. It feels like psychologically there's a chance to really put a knife in the rest of the league, right?
Yeah, and I think it's a big thing for our team as well to try and get that validation of, listen, we've been hyped up all season, and look, we're living up to that hype. So having that 7 or 8 point buffer on the teams below us is going to be so important going into some of the games where you may not have someone like a Messi. And overall, it does a lot for the team morale because this team has been built up to feel like a big, strong, the dominating team in this league. And so far, it was a stuttering start. Obviously, losing to Monterrey was not great, but we've sort of started to get into a rhythm where we are dominating teams. We are showing that our play style is absolutely phenomenal in certain in certain phases of the game. Now we just need to be consistent with it. We just need to be more ruthless with it and take our chances and put away teams without issues. There's still issues with this team. The defense is, a big question mark at times, and we sort of create our own issues. But having that 19 points in the next 7 games is going to sort of show the rest of the league that we may have faults, but we're still able to absolutely destroy some of our opposition. Imagine if we're a fully consolidated team with 0 issues in the back line, in the midfield, and in the front line. So I agree with you. It's psychologically going to be really important. But my worry with this is, do we feel the same way about these 7 games without Lionel Messi in the equation?
You mean the next 7?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I appreciate you bringing that up because I just got this ready to put on screen. These are the 7 games that come after Copa America begins, and you can take that game against St. Louis out of this. For those that don't know, the Copa America starts on June 20th, and everyone there will miss that Philadelphia game because they'll be with the national team preparing for that tournament. But they'll all be there for the St. Louis game. Likewise, the Euros start on the 14th of June. I think the only player that impacts is Sergei Kristoff. So, that one is less important in terms of Inter Miami season. But these 7 games are the ones that we might be without Lionel Messi. At Philadelphia, home versus Columbus, at Nashville, at Charlotte, at Cincinnati, and then home versus Toronto and Chicago. It feels like that's a significantly more challenging run of games than the 7 that we previously talked about.
Yeah, I think the mood completely changes, right? When you lose someone like a Lionel Messi from your team, it just becomes a lot more, this is questionable as to what kind of team's going to show up for these games. Oof. Looks hard, man. Looks hard to win a good set of
harder.
these games.
It looks significantly
harder.
A lot harder. And
I would say
I think that goes to your point about how much the team wants to win these upcoming 7, because it sets you up to be able to struggle a little more in that midsummer period. And, even if you establish yourself psychologically as this dominant team, I think even if you drop some points without Lionel Messi, it doesn't affect that psychology because it's without Lionel Messi. Just so we're clear, the last game of Copa America, I believe, is also July 20th or July 21st or something like that. So only players that are on a team that goes to the final or maybe the 3rd place game will be gone through that game. Any team that loses earlier will be back with the team. So if a team loses in the group stage, they should be back for the Toronto game. They should be back for the Chicago game. Let's talk about the players we might actually lose, because I think this list isn't as long as maybe we feared earlier, in the offseason and, previously. Last September, I remember we lost Lionel Messi to the September window, but we also lost like 10 other players. I think we had 10 or 11 internationals that window. And so we played Sporting Kansas City and we were really down to bare bones. I think we got lucky that Campana wasn't called up to the Ecuador team because he was the one that delivered us that victory. But this year, it doesn't feel like we have quite the robust number of internationals as we did last season. Obviously, Messi will be with Argentina, assuming he's healthy. And of course, if he's not healthy, he won't be with us either. But no Finland in the Euros, so Robert Taylor will be with us. Matias Rojas has been with the Paraguay national team, but I don't think he's a main contributor. I'm not 100% sure on that. So it doesn't feel to me like he's a lock to go with them. Gressel's not going to go with the U.S. national team. Busquets is retired. David Ruiz, Honduras isn't in the Copa America, so he's not going. Kramaski, I would be surprised if he goes with the U.S. national team. Obviously, Jordi Alba is retired from international duty. None of our fullbacks are going. Aviles, Frey. None of these guys are going. And so you're talking about Drake Callender, maybe, but I doubt it. Sergei Kristov may be going for Ukraine in the Euros, though he didn't get called up during their last window. And then Diego Gomez being a guy that might play for Paraguay. But other than that, you're going to have the vast majority of your roster. And there's a chance it's really only Lionel Messi. And I know that there's the Olympics later on, and we'll definitely lose guys for that. But that's a shorter tournament. It's about half the time. And, it's later on in the summer. And so if you get Lionel Messi back, it's okay if you lose Diego Gomez for a game or two. With that said, is there any of these guys that feel like make that much of a difference other than Lionel Messi?
I think Robert Taylor, the fact that he's not going to the Euros is a big plus for us, because losing him in that left wing position really affects us, especially when we didn't have Matias Rojas in. He was the only player of that dimension and that ilk who was able to play in that position. So for me, Robert Taylor for sure. But yeah, I was expecting a little bit more of a loss there, and I may have been conflating the Olympics and the Copa America. For some reason, I thought they'd be, at similar times, so we'd lose maybe a bunch of more people. But it seems like our backline is going to be intact, so there's not going to be too many changes there. In terms of the midfield as well, Redondo would potentially go out later in the summer for international duty, so he's going to be back hopefully. Gomez he's obviously injured right now, so we can just assume that even if he goes, it's going to be similar to what the situation is. And the fact that we've been able to win a few games without Gomez in the midfield is a positive. Of course, having him in there is going to be an absolute, boost, but generally speaking, not as big of a loss either. And yeah, I think it just looks a lot more positive than we are giving it credit. But Lionel Messi is worth like 5 of those players. So losing him alone, because he's the one who's just been turning it out when we need him to and pulling us out of some of the situations that we put ourselves in. I'm hoping that the next 7 games that we're playing sort of gives some of the players the confidence to try and play up to their potential, because on paper, this team without Lionel Messi should still be able to win some of these games. Maybe not as easily, but just, grind out results. I think we've been unable to do that without Messi so far. So for me, the next 7 games will be really important to build that level of confidence. And then we're just going to have to showcase that in these set of games that we're seeing on screen, that we can actually do it without Messi, because we're going to need it.
Let's just speak hypothetically. This team, even without Lionel Messi, should be able to get results in this league. And again, I get this is a tough stretch that we're looking at, right? At Philadelphia, home versus Columbus, at Cincinnati. Those are some really tough games. But still, you throw in Matias Rojas on the right wing and Robert Taylor on the left. And if the only guy you lose is Lionel Messi, Inter Miami should still be competitive to win every single one of these games. And if not the favorite, right? The betting favorite would be a draw in most of these games. Other than Messi, is there one player that you really want to stay for this period that you think would make a huge difference?
Diego Gomez, once he's back from injury, because he just brings that dynamism in the midfield.
It feels like he's the only player that would really really hurt. Now, let me say, Drake Callender would also really hurt, but I just don't expect him to be called up because Matt Turner is going to be the starter for the U.S. national team in that tournament. And so there's no point in missing a month of games for Miami if you're just going to be a bench option.
He's also not in great form.
Yeah, but listen, he's got 7 games to fix it. So, but I just think they're going to bring someone in from Europe that's not playing games, so they won't be missing games with their team. So yeah, Diego Gomez. Can I give you the nightmare scenario?
Do it. Throw it on me.
Diego Gomez comes back healthy, and then he goes to the Copa America with Paraguay, and then he goes to the Olympics with Paraguay, and then he leaves. I'm saying this now so that everyone can sort of pray that doesn't happen over the course of the next month while he's recovering from this injury, because other than that, I think that we have a chance to have a great summer. I think we're probably going to add players to this team in the summer if there's any weaknesses. If these 7 games that we're about to go through don't turn out the way we want them to, it feels like Inter Miami's not going to be shy about making changes. And if they do, then we'll already be rocking and we won't feel the need to. So it feels like there's a chance this ends up being a pretty good summer. Do you agree?
Yes, but I just want to point out that every time you bring up a nightmare scenario, you sort of jinx our team. So for me, listeners, if we never see the light of Diego Gomez ever again play from Inter Miami, I want you to blame Scotty for this, because he has put this out into the open and it's now just going to materialize itself. Damn.
I apologize. And at least I didn't do it during a pregame show, right? Okay. There was one other thing we wanted to do in this episode, and that was to sort of talk about where we're at in terms of where we think guys will go up and down in terms of how we feel about them over the course of the next 7 games. This is the ranking, the draft we did 6 weeks ago, sort of middle of March. So I guess that was, about 6 weeks ago. We didn't do just power rankings. We kind of drafted one after the other. And we will probably do this again after this run of games. There's a 2-week break between the end of this run and sort of the start of the next 7. So we'll probably go do this again. But looking at this list that we did, give me a player, and we'll kind of go back and forth here. Give me a player that you feel like you're expecting to rise up the rankings when we do this again in 6 weeks, or fall down the rankings when we do this again in 4 or 5 weeks, I guess.
Yeah, for our listeners, or our viewers, if you're confused about what this list is and why does it look this way, go watch that previous podcast. It'll give you some of the context of why someone like a Benjamin Kramaski is down that far into the order.
Yeah, maybe I should run, for people that are only listening to this audio. Let me run through this real quick. We had number 1, Luis Suarez, number 2, Lionel Messi, Robert Taylor, Jordi Alba 4, Sergio Busquets 5, Diego Gomez 6, Drake Callender 7, Redondo 8, Campana 9, Gressel 10, Aviles 11, Ian Frey 12, David Ruiz 13, Benjamin Kramaski 14, Nico Freire 15, Franco Negri 16, Sergei Kristoff 17, Robbie Robinson 18, Noah Allen 19, and Lawson Sunderland 20. Give me a player that you think is going to rise or fall up the rankings or down.
It's easy, right? Benjamin Kramaski, the star boy, he's going to rise from that 14th spot.
It felt low at the time. I certainly wouldn't have taken him above or below David Ruiz, but we hadn't seen him in a while, right? And with this team, with this amount of talent, you kind of forget, right? Diego Gomez was having that amazing start to the season, and so maybe we forgot about how good Kramaski really is, but he's dynamic and he's lightning in a bottle, man. And it's really good to see him get on the goal sheet, and he needs to start this weekend.
Yeah, scored on his 3rd appearance back from injury. Had a, as you said, lightning in a bottle sort of a reaction. Looked really spicy in some of the plays that he was setting up. Didn't look like he lost a step. He was really good in terms of understanding his positioning vis-a-vis the other offensive players. And I think he's going to be very, very important in this next run of games. And it's just going to go up from here. 14 is so low for him, man.
He's only played 47 minutes total in those 3 appearances, and he's got that goal. He had 9 goal contributions last year as an 18-year-old. Let's not forget how young he is. I I want to talk about these midfield options because he is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth midfielder on our list. I know that's too low, but where is he going to be in after these 7 games? We have him below Diego Gomez, Sergio Busquets, Federico Redondo, Julian Gressel, and David Ruiz. I want to see him start over Julian Gressel this weekend. I don't know if we're going to see that, but it feels like he's rising up very quickly in that sort of midfield power ranking.
Yeah, I would. Before the season, if you gave me that list and said, where would you rank him? I would put him in the top 2 easily. There's one worry, though. Tata Martino. I'm not sure how much of a chance he's going to get with Tata being so stubborn in playing the players that he prefers. I know Tata likes him and is not afraid to put him on, but with Gressel in the team, it just seems like there's a certain preference that Tata has for Julian Gressel, and Benjamin Kromaski might be the player sacrifice for that, unless he's able to make a really big impact off the bench and make himself indisposable like Diego Gomez did. For me, I think he's, if not the top, then at least the second or the third best midfielder on this team, keeping aside Sergio Busquets, who's obviously going to play.
Well, let's throw Busquets in there. Is there a chance? Is there a way that he is in their best midfield when everyone's healthy? Diego Gomez, Redondo, Busquets, Gressel, etc. Do you see him being above Diego Gomez or Redondo?
If I'm picking a team and the play style that I like Miami to play, I want him and Gomez to be together in that midfield with Sergio Busquets. That is an absolutely devastating midfield, by the way.
Okay, but then stop. Let's go back to our conversation at the beginning where we talked about the Argentine national team not loving Kromaski, I guess, enough. And yet we're putting him on the starting lineup above Federico Redondo, who's one of their star boys, at least for the youth setup for the Olympic team. What are your thoughts?
It's politics as well, man. Like I don't necessarily disagree with your point of
no, sorry. I don't mean to rehash that conversation, but just what does it say to you about Benjamin Kromaski that we think he can start over a guy like Federico Redondo?
I think his ceiling is phenomenally high. He's a brilliant player. I really like what I see from him. And that has to do with a personal preference of how I like my midfield setup to be. And I want my team's midfield setup to be dynamic, to be quick, to be skillful. And Benjamin Kromaski brings all of that. That being said, Redondo is a fantastic player as well. We've seen that in the games that he's played for us. He brings a certain level of stability and a certain level of calmness, and sort of is a buffer against Sergio Busquets' unathletic nature of play. But I still would take Benjamin Kromaski in there, man. It's just, call it a bias or call it a preference. For me, it's just he has this spark and this energy that he can completely change games with. And we saw that in the 5 minutes that he played against New England. Imagine him starting that game. And that being said, of course, he can't be starting every single game. He needs rest. He needs to be rotated. But for me, it's fantastic having so many options.
When we did this draft, you took Robert Taylor a lot higher than I would have. And I think you've been proven more accurate than not. I'm interested to see if Benjamin Kromaski ends up being, you feel the same about him by the time we do this draft again. Let me ask you a question. Where would you put Matias Rojas on this list? He wasn't with the team when we did this, so he wasn't eligible for this list. But where would you put him right now?
I will put him anywhere between 15 and 20 right now, because obviously he's only played one game. We've seen, 10 minutes from him. Really interesting, fun 10 minutes, and he did have an impact, and I'm excited, but we need to see what level of consistency he brings, how he actually plays over an extended period of 90 minutes. And for me, I think he would fit in above some of the players that are in there in that 15 to 20 spot, but the sample size is too small to give him a higher ranking there. Yeah,
I agree with you. He would have been my stock down if you put him a little higher. I think people maybe overreacted to his performance. And I was very high on Matias Rojas before we signed him, and I felt like he's going to be a really good player for us. But I saw someone comment that we should trade Robert Taylor for assets in the summer because we have Matias Rojas, and I thought that was a little ridiculous because Robert Taylor's the man. But
he's number 3 on this list, guys. Come on, we can't just throw him out.
Matias Rojas had a really impressive first start, but I think we just have to remember that that was his first game playing for a team that now has Lionel Messi, and he's trying to make a really good impression. And so a lot of that hustle and a lot of that effort feels like it's sort of obvious when you're trying to make an impression on a team, especially when you're not coming in to be a starter. He's going to have to earn his spot. So I just wanted to pump the brakes on him just a little bit. But I agree with you. I think that 15 to 20 range is I think that's where we should put him now, and maybe he can rise up a spot or two from there. But I don't think the idea of him being in a top 10 spot in 7 weeks is realistic. So he was the guy kind of signaled for spot, stock down. But I guess the guy I'm going to go downward is Lawson Sunderland. He feels like a guy that's not going to make this team. Or make this list next time.
Poor guy, man. You're just shoving him out of the rankings. You're not going down. You're shoving him out.
Well, listen, we have to add Marcelo Wiegand. We have to add Matias Rojas. Yannick Bright wasn't on this list. Leo Afonso wasn't on this list when we did this. And I see Demdad is asking, what is this based on? About 6 weeks ago, we drafted who was the best players on Inter Miami, or maybe it was the most impactful. But the idea was to just draft one after the other. And so Saur went first, I went second. Saur went third, I went fourth. So these didn't really reflect either of our rankings perfectly, but they were sort of a, draft one after the other type of thing. So yeah, it doesn't feel like Sunderland is going to play at all. That's my thing. I think in the next 7 games, he might not get 1 minute.
We
have that many midfield. We have that much quality in the midfield.
I didn't even realize that 4 players you listed there: Wiegand, Afonso, Yannick Bright, and then obviously Matias Rojas, not even on this list. And they're going to be big players in the next 7 games. They're going to be very important players in the next 7 games. So I agree with you. I think Robbie Robinson, Lawson Sunderland. I'm interested to know that you didn't push down Robbie Robinson and you pushed down Lawson Sunderland before him, because we don't even know if Robbie Robinson exists anymore. Let's be honest.
Robbie's not going to make this list probably either when we do this again, but I don't think his stock is going to go any lower just because we haven't seen him at all. And I don't really expect to see him in the next 7 games either. But Lawson Sunderland is a guy who's healthy and could play, but we have so many midfield options and there's not going to be that much of a call for rotation. So, he's not going to start over Kramaski and David Ruiz and Diego Gomez and Redondo and Busquets and Julian Gressel. Like, he's just not going to start over Julian Gressel ever in Tata's mind, or Kramaski, or David Ruiz. So I don't think he's going to get any time over the next 7 games. And so that to me is why I think he's stocked down. He did play for the B team over the weekend. He looks like a man among boys in the B team. He's much bigger. The MLS Next Pro is really interesting because you have like 17-year-olds with like 24-year-olds. And so you can kind of get this mix mash of players. We had so to me, he's like the one guy. Give me another one before we sort of wrap this conversation up that you kind of pinpoint as a guy you see as a mover.
Here's a slightly controversial one and a non-obvious one. I think David Ruiz is going to go up in this list. I think he's silently built himself into a role on this team, and his contributions are going sort of under the radar. And I think he's going to, maybe even if it's like a couple of spots, but I think he's going to rise a little bit because he's proving himself to be a really good utility player, especially after that red card that he had. I think he's getting, better and better, and he's found himself a role on this team, which is really interesting. Now, it could suffer once some of our players come back from injury, and, I would definitely eat my words then, but I'm watching out for him because I think there's definitely potential there.
Yeah, I think there's a chance that we think more highly of David Ruiz at the end of this than we do now, and he still falls down this rankings just because guys like Kramaski, Franco Negri, Nico Frede, and then Matias Rojas and Marcelo Wiegand are guys that could just jump him just based on sort of the nature of where we're at. But yeah, I agree, man. He's underrated by a lot of fans. And, you know, it's easy to point to the big moments, and that red card was one of them, obviously, but he's a young player and those types of things happen with young players. But on a game-to-game basis, he's a consistent player that is impactful and helps in the midfield. And you have to appreciate a player like that. I will say, I don't know how many minutes he's going to get over the next 7 weeks either, next 7 games either. I guess over the next couple, he'll get plenty. But, you know, spoiler alert, my prediction for this weekend is we're going to get Gressel and Kremaski in the midfield instead of David Ruiz. And I don't know if we're going to get David Ruiz back in the midfield again for a little bit, at least not in the starting lineup.
Just don't put him on right back. Please, Tata, just don't put him on right back.
Yeah, we could see that too. And then once Gomez or Redondo come back, again, I really like David Ruiz. I think he could be a foundational player for Inter Miami, even in the post-Messi era. But I think for the next couple months, at least once those guys come back, he might not get a ton of game time either. Just because we have so much depth and talent in that midfield, really.
I agree with you. And I think it's going to be about how he carves himself a role on this team, like Yannick Bright has done. Like, we know Yannick Bright is obviously not going to start, but he's become into this player that comes on and sort of gives us more defensive stability. So maybe Ruiz can be someone who comes off the bench and gives us a little bit more dynamism in that midfield. But I agree with you. Once the players come back from injury, it's going to be interesting to see what his role is. But I'll raise my hand first and say I was a David Ruiz detractor. I didn't rate him very highly. And of the last few games, I think he's done a really good job and needs to be appreciated for that.
Well, you know, he had a few games early in the preseason where he looked really good. And it almost felt like Tata Martino saw him as a top line midfielder in this team. He had that really nice goal on the trip to Saudi Arabia. I think he started the FC Dallas game. And then once Diego Gomez came back, it kind of felt like David Ruiz just got pushed aside and Gomez was the guy for that role. And deservedly so, because Diego Gomez has been amazing. But and then once you throw in Kremaski, who's now healthy, and then we signed Federico Redondo, it felt like there was a chance David Ruiz would really fall down the pecking order and maybe his best minutes would come at right back. And yet here he is starting for the last 3 games, or at least 2 games, in the midfield, and is sort of an obvious pick. So yeah, that's our David Ruiz conversation. Any other player that you feel really interested to talk about in this episode before we sort of go to some of the questions in the chat that we didn't get to and then sort of wrap it up?
I think one more just to keep an eye out very quickly, Drake Callender.
That's a good point. That's a good one.
I think he could potentially go down, as much as it hurts to say, not in terms of how much we rate him as a player, but just in terms of his impact, because there are going to be a lot of the players below him who are, I think, going to get better and have a lot more to say in terms of their impact on this team. And Callender has shown that he's sort of becoming a little bit of his own worst enemy, and I'm hoping he gets back into form soon.
You know, the interesting thing about that is that when we did this draft, I remember us thinking, man, maybe we should have taken Drake Callender a little higher on this list.
Yeah.
And yet, I think you might be right. I still think the world of Drake Callender, but you have some really talented players on this roster. And I don't know if we're going to see him in that same spot. Maybe similar to David Ruiz, he might fall just as a matter of everyone rising above him, but other players rising above him, not necessarily his stock falling too much, although he hasn't been in the best form lately. I want to go to some of these questions from the chat just because we missed them. Jay Hopper Beats from South Africa. Hi, thanks for joining us. So we really appreciate it. Redondo over Kremaski. We had that conversation about those 3. Redondo, he occupies space better and he can go forward. He makes Busquets more comfortable. I want to remind our listeners that Kremaski and Busquets started like 15 plus games together last season, and both of them were locked in starters for us once Busquets arrived. So I'm sure the two of them are very comfortable. Obviously, we haven't seen it a ton this season because of Kremaski's injury, but those two have played together plenty.
Yeah, and I will also say, I think it comes down to the preference of how you want to build up your midfield. I'm not saying Redondo is better than Kremaski or vice versa. I think it just comes down to how much defensive stability you want and what kind of skills you want. And I think Redondo and Kremaski are somewhat different profiles. They don't necessarily fit as parallels like Gomez and Kremaski do. So maybe that might be a better comparison to have. And I think they just offer different things. So maybe it really depends on which team that we're playing and what we want from our midfield in that particular game, which is another good headache to have. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it'll be interesting to see what Kremaski's role is on this team, and it's just going to be a matter of seeing how Tata rates him and understands his positioning.
Yeah, and let's remember, Federico Redondo played 4 games with this team, and so I think he's got a world of potential. And I said this back when he was playing. The expectation is for him to be one of the best midfielders in the league. That's what his price tag would sort of dictate. But we have Diego Gomez has been undroppable, and Kremaski's going to have the next month to try and prove that he deserves that starting spot. So, and then you have Julian Gressel, who Tata really loves. So it's going to be tough, man. It's really going to be tough for all of these guys, and hopefully that just brings out the best in them, and we sort of just get dominant midfields for the rest of the season. Quasar, with Messi in the team, Inter Miami should win at least 6 games from 7, and after Messi out to Copa, both Gomez and Redondo should be back, though Gomez might be with the national team for Paraguay. I agree, man. 6 is like the expectation. I know we talked about it. We framed it like what Inter Miami like needs, but what are your expectations? Like if you had to predict out of 7 games.
I think we're going to win 5 and then draw 2. We're not going to lose a single game there.
I think we're going to win 6 and get a draw, dude. I think we might get 19 points. I think we might really establish ourselves. And I also know that I might have just shot us in the foot by saying that, but that's sort of where my heart's leading right now. And then last question from Skrilla. If we don't win the Leagues Cup, but we win the MLS Cup, will you feel good about that?
I think so.
Yeah, listen, I thought in the offseason that we were going to be part of 5 competitions, including the U.S. Open Cup, and I rated the Leagues Cup 5th out of those. It doesn't really matter to me that much. It would be awesome to win it again. It would lock us into the CONCACAF Champions Cup next season. But to me, the MLS Cup now is the most important trophy, and the Supporter Shield is second. The Leagues Cup it would be fun. It would, I love watching Inter Miami. So if we made a nice deep run, that would be awesome. But if they don't win it, I'm okay with that. Yeah,
if this is a toss up between this or that, between MLS Cup or Leagues Cup, I would choose the MLS Cup for sure. We've already won the Leagues Cup. You want to fill up cabinets with different trophies. So for me, it's a no-brainer.
And if you win the MLS Cup, you get that nice, beautiful, shiny star above your logo. And I would really love that. That would be awesome. All right, Saur, anything else before I sort of wrap it up? It was about an hour and 7 minutes, and we did a lot of talking about these next 7 games and what we're expecting. But any final words before we sort of sign off?
Yeah, today's podcast was a lot more chill. We were, contemplating and deliberating on what the season might turn out to be in the near future. But the next one's going to be spicy, guys. We're going to be back with that New York Red Bulls pre-game show, and it's a revenge game for us. So please tune in and join in and get involved.
Yeah, I'm just checking Twitter to make sure we didn't miss anything, because we have a habit of going live as things break, but it doesn't look like anything's happened tonight. Guys, I'll be on a different podcast called The False Nine tomorrow night. So if you're interested in that, I implore you to check it out, and I will sort of tweet about it if that's something you guys are interested in. But other than that, Saur and I will be back for the pregame show, which we always do in the hour before kickoff. We play the Red Bulls 7:30 Eastern on Saturday night. So at about 6:30 Eastern, we'll go live. That'll be on YouTube. So for those that are listening to this on audio, I implore you guys to come join us. It's always a lot of fun to get the nerves out right before the game and talk about what we expect and sort of get into Inter Miami mode as the game is starting. So again, I implore you all to join us for that. And other than that, it was a fun time, and we'll see you guys all next time. Enjoy your evening.